Is Warframe worth playing in 2025? That's a good question, one you might have clicked on this very video for. Because while it still has strong numbers, jumping into a game that is over a decade old now sure makes you think twice. Did you miss important content? Are there still enough beginners around to team up with? Or are you about to board a sinking ship? Well, in this video, I'm gonna answer all of this so you have the full picture to decide for yourself whether Warframe in 2025 is for you or not. As always, big shout out to all our generous channel members, and now, let's get right into it. Now, let's start out the video with the first and probably most important question out of all: what even is Warframe? This question is actually a little bit of a community meme because Warframe over the years has acquired so many different game modes and so much different content that it is relatively hard to put it in one distinct box. If I were to explain it in the simplest terms possible, then what I would say is that yes, Warframe technically is a co-op looter shooter that you can play alone or with up to 3 friends, where you're playing as one of over 60 different space ninja characters, the Warframes, going to town against hordes and hordes of different enemy factions, wielding hundreds of different individual weapons. That would be the surface level stuff. One thing that sets Warframe apart from most other looter shooters, though, is the very special movement system that you have here, because where most other shooters are relatively grounded in how you play them, Warframe has a very crazy over-the-top movement system where you spend more time in the air than actually on the ground. You're probably also seeing it in the background right now. You can jump super high, do crazy parkour maneuvers, and it not only looks very cool and impressive, it also feels very smooth from a gameplay perspective. You'll be able to pull off all these maneuvers blind, no problem. These missions that you play and that you also see in the background take place across a variety of different stellar bodies in the universe, from the deserts of Mars to the overgrown forests of futuristic Earth, even into more abstract environments like the Lovecraftian-looking Entrati laboratories that you're gonna find later in your playthrough. Warframe has a lot of not only visual variety, but also tons of different mission types so that no 2 runs that you do ever feel exactly the same. And as if these standard randomly generated missions are not enough, there are also multiple different open-world areas in the game, like the Plains of Eidolon on Earth, the Orb Velis on Venus, the Cambion Drift on Deimos, or the fantasy parallel universe of Deviri. All these open worlds not only offer the standard missions, similar to what you would run on your standard star map mission nodes, but they also have more exotic activities, like, for example, fishing, if you're up for a relaxed Sunday afternoon. Or you could go into a cave and mine valuable minerals that you can then use as a resource to craft specific items or exchange for more reputation with the locals. As you see, the community meme of being unable to describe what Warframe really is kind of is rooted in all the different game modes and features that you can engage with if you like them, or completely ignore if you don't. And what about updates? Are they still releasing new stuff? Well, that is a clear yes. For the last couple of years, Warframe has followed a strict schedule of releasing 4 major content updates per year, 1 per quarter, with the December update being by far the largest, usually introducing a new chapter to the main story with a whole bunch of other stuff. And when we're talking about content updates in general, then one thing I want to make very, very clear here is that in contrast to other games, like for example Destiny 2, who over time remove old content from the game, or maybe even worse, gacha games like Genshin Impact, who have time-limited events that don't reoccur, and if you haven't been there at the right time, you will never get to know certain story aspects behind characters or other important things. All of this is not a concern in Warframe, because every piece of content that has been introduced to the game since its release is still there to be played and enjoyed by everybody, with the exception being some very, very few and small time-limited events that usually reoccur once per year or so. However, I would say they make up less than 1% of the entire game. But now, what about the loot? After all, Warframe can still be classified as a looter-shooter, so what are we looting? See, the main difference that Warframe has compared to its looter-shooter peers is that here you're not grinding for the perfect randomly generated weapon that is super-duper strong then. No, in Warframe, weapons are actually not randomly generated. What you're grinding for here mostly is either the resources and blueprints required to even craft those weapons in the first place, or, and that is something much more prevalent, there is a pretty vast modding system where you can put these stat cards onto your weapons and warframes to massively increase their power and tune them to your personal preferences by modifying stuff like more base damage, more fire rates. You can put different elements on them. It would take me hours to explain the entire system, so I'm gonna stop it right here. But in general, in Warframe, the loot that you're looking for will be those types of upgrades because the very strong and very rare ones are what makes or breaks your build. Now, if I'm being fully honest, I could probably go on for multiple hours listing all types of features and things that you can do in Warframe, but that would overload the video pretty hard, so instead, in the rest of the video, we're gonna take a deeper look at different specific aspects of the game that you would likely want to know before starting out. Before that though, like the video to make sure that Warframe will have another 10 strong years on the clock. Cheers so much for your support! Now, so much for the rough overview of what Warframe looks like on a day-to-day basis. I hope that you got somewhat of a feeling for what I'm trying to say. However, all of this might be nice and well, but there is still one very important question that I think every player thinking about getting into an MMO is asking themselves, and that is, how does the player count look like? Is there a healthy population? Is the game still stable? Or is it already in decline where you don't want to be the person boarding the sinking ship? Well, with Warframe, this is actually quite a positive point. Yes, the game officially released in 2013 and thereby is 12 years old now, but it still is boasting very respectable numbers, with SteamDB saying around about 50,000 average players as of recording this video, and the development has been kinda like this for 5 years or more already. Sure, there was a time in 2017-2018 where the first open world sections of the game released that led to a surge in player count, which hasn't ever really been achieved over a longer period of time ever since. However, if you look at the graph over the grand scheme of things over the entire lifespan, then I think we're not really seeing a decline. We're just being stable for years on end, with the occasional peak whenever a big new update comes out. And of course, what you're seeing right here is just the Steam graph, right? But you can also play Warframe with the launcher that you download from the Warframe website, in which case, if you do that, you're not even gonna show up here. And then there's all the console versions plus mobile. So if you see 50,000 concurrent players on Steam, that's only one part of the picture, meaning all in all, I wouldn't necessarily worry about Warframe dying anytime soon. But okay, let's just assume you made the decision that you want to start playing Warframe right now. Welcome to the game! Now, let's take a look at how the actual new player experience in 2025 is, because while it is cool that Warframe does not delete old content, everything that has ever been released is still there, that also means the game is a little bit infamous for being very overwhelming for new players, because all the activities from 10 years of content are being on offer at the same time. Well, let me be 100% real, this is not necessarily wrong. Yes, it is great that there is so much content, but as a new player who can choose between doing the Star Chart missions, playing in the open world, spending time on the Nightwave Battle Pass, and absolutely everything else that is available, it is a bit overwhelming, and the game still is very far away from doing a great job at giving you that red line that you probably want to have. However, it should also be noted that the new player experience has massively improved over the last few years, with loads and loads of quality of life features being added, like revamped boss fights, making them more interesting and more distinct. Stuff like speeding up early game progression, making it that crafting some items doesn't take as long anymore, giving you essential mods for upgrading your equipment as a reward for finishing the first few story missions so you don't have to grind for them anymore, overhauling the UI a bit here and there to make it easier to grasp what you actually need to do, and many more things. Long story short, No, Warframe is not a Ubisoft game where you have a big fat red marker in your HUD that constantly points you exactly to the point where you need to go. The game is not that handholdy, but also, it is definitely the most beginner-friendly it has ever been right now, and it's only getting better with, for example, the release of the next big update, which will happen in a couple of weeks. We don't have a release date just yet, but it's probably going to be in October, where they have announced to release a full-fledged new player quest that is dedicated to teach you step by step how the modding and upgrading process for weapons in Warframe works, as that is one of the biggest complaints for new players, that they just find it too overwhelming and scary. And let's be 100% real, if you look at this screen for the first time, I do understand why you would say this. But yeah, overall, the new player experience is far from perfect, but it is still actively being worked on, making the game more beginner-friendly update by update, but still, you will probably feel overwhelmed here and there, in which case I would recommend just looking at a beginner guide on YouTube. There are a lot of videos out there, I've also made some of them, that are very good at just explaining the overall framework and giving you that red line on how to best progress through the game without being distracted. But hey, who knows? Maybe you're not here to grind and upgrade and live this power fantasy. Maybe you're looking for an MMO with a nice deep lore and story that you can uncover for yourself and experience. How does Warframe hold up in that regard? Well, first of all, one thing I want to make clear right at the start of this chapter is I'm not gonna spoil anything. In fact, I'm not even gonna explain anything about the story at all. The only thing that I do want to say here is that Warframe is often mistaken for being this super over-the-top power fantasy where you're just deleting enemies left and right, with the story just being a shallow tagged-on thing just to be able to give a remote reason for why you're even doing the things that you're doing. And whoever says that is completely wrong. See, the thing with Warframe is that the Warframe universe is actually very fascinating with a deep-running lore and a lot to uncover about not only the story of the Tenno and the Warframes, but also the enemy factions, how they work, what their ideals are, how they came to be, and many more very interesting topics. With the biggest step taken in terms of story over the last couple years being the Kim system, which is a chatting system that allows you to exchange messages with in-game characters to get to know them more, to uncover more about their personalities, and actually experience some really emotional stories. The depth of this relatively new communication system being added to the game is incredibly surprising, it is very well executed, and you're not only learning more about the characters that you're chatting with, but also about the lore of the entire Warframe universe. If you're a fan of this type of stuff, then the Warframe 1999 update that came last winter is definitely something that you should check out. Just one thing that also absolutely needs to be mentioned is that Warframe is definitely not straightforward in its storytelling. Most of what's going on is either explained through short cutscenes, dialogues within the mission, or, and that sounds very much like a Souls game now, in the description of items and equipment pieces. In fact, if you're a fan of straightforward storytelling, where a question is being raised at the beginning of the story and then you work through the story and at the end you have your satisfying conclusion, that is just not what's gonna happen in Warframe. Yes, there is a deep lore to uncover, and you can learn a lot more than you learn from just playing the missions if you really invest the time and dig through your item descriptions to find the bigger picture, but that is only really satisfying if you're the type of player who likes that type of stuff. If you want to have a straightforward story start to finish and at the end have your conclusion, which by the way is perfectly fine, I'm kind of also more of that type of player, then you might not be satisfied and be left over with a couple question marks after the fact. And just in case you're the type of player who doesn't care about story at all and just needs a simple reason to go to town on 100 different enemies, well, then you could of course also just ignore it entirely. That's fair. Everybody's free to play the game however they see fit. Now, let's up next go from talking about the virtual characters in the game to the actual real-life human beings playing it. Let's next talk about the community, because I could imagine that before jumping in, a lot of players would probably like to know how the general atmosphere among players is. See, you might have heard it from other people before, and I'm gonna repeat the same thing again. The Warframe community overall is a very polite and a very welcoming, wholesome community. Yes, there are toxic people, just like in any other community, and as a YouTuber or content creator in general, you naturally get exposed much more to those negative influences. I'm sure most other creators watching right now will understand very well what I mean, but all of this is far from being representative for the community as a whole. Especially if you are a beginner or a returning player, you will struggle to find another place on the internet where you're being welcomed with open arms the way that it is in Warframe. If you have a question, you can just pop it into the in-game chat and you will find somebody to answer that for you. If you're struggling with a mission type, just go to the recruit chat and say, "Hey, I'm a beginner, I'm struggling with that mission, can somebody help me?" And I'm sure within seconds there are going to be veterans who are more than happy to answer your question and help you through the mission. So yeah, long story short, as a beginner, the Warframe community definitely doesn't bite. So far, so good. Game sounds amazing, right? However, it isn't amazing if you can't even play it in the first place. So, let's also talk about the technical aspect of the piece of software that is Warframe, because there are quite a couple things that should be mentioned here. First off, Warframe is a relatively lean game, let's call it that, when it comes to overall resource consumption. Yes, it has become more demanding over the last few years with the release of more modern and more graphically intense updates, but then again, there are tons of options that you could tweak to make the game run smoother on your personal hardware. As for the other platforms, on the big consoles, PlayStation and Xbox, I haven't seen anyone complaining about performance, so I assume that runs fine even though I can't test it myself. However, I did hear from a couple of people that the Nintendo Switch version is quite a bit weaker in performance and also has pretty long loading times. Again, I can't confirm that for myself, but it would be expected, from a generally weaker hardware that is the Switch. And when it comes to the phone version, then currently it is unfortunately only available for iOS, which I don't own, so I can't even play it on mobile myself. If there are some iPhone players watching right now, feel free to share your experience with the iOS version in the comments down below. I would be thrilled to hear how that runs. But from what has been said at TennoCon earlier this year, it looks like they're nearing the end of the development for the Android version, so maybe at the end of the year, hopefully early next year, we will also finally get the Android version for all types of Android devices, so you can finally play Warframe on your smart fridge or something. But no. What I'm saying in general is Warframe's performance is doing pretty well, even if you're not having the craziest gaming PC. The game too is fully cross-platform, so you can play together with your friends even if your friends are on completely different devices. You can also trade with, talk to, and build clans with players on other platforms. And also you as a player are not limited to just one platform. You can play at home on your PC and then when you're sitting in the train, just fire up Warframe on your phone. That's perfectly doable. The only thing regarding performance that I personally am not 100% satisfied with is the fact that the game can be a bit buggy when you're playing online in a lobby with bad internet connection. That can lead to quite some trouble and funny bugs, but it can also happen that the host drops out and then the host migration fails and you lose all your mission progress. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but every longtime Warframe player will surely agree it does happen often enough in public lobbies to be a bit of a pain point. By the way, if you've ever lost something very valuable due to a failed host migration, just let us know in the comments down below which was the most painful item that you have ever lost because you got thrown out of a mission. I'm curious to hear your stories. So yeah, the tech is definitely alright, and given the fact that you don't even have to pay a single cent to be able to jump in, that makes it quite enticing. However, it also raises another question. If it is free to play, how does the monetization look like? Is it a fairly monetized game or is it a cheap cash grab with pay-to-win features? Let's talk about the free-to-play system next, and I am very happy to announce Warframe is one of the most customer-friendly, the most fair free-to-play games out there when it comes to how they handle their monetization. See, just like other free-to-play games, Warframe 2 has a premium currency. Here it is called Platinum, and from this currency you can buy pretty much everything in the shop. from boosters for experience to resources or whatever, to weapons and warframes, and tons upon tons of cosmetic options like skins, armor pieces, color palettes, you name it, to make your warframe look as bling as humanly possible. And not just that, even in-game items, upgrades, mods, and so on that aren't directly purchasable from the official store, you can still trade with other players and buy those things from Platinum, which on the other hand also means you don't even have to pay a single cent in order to get Platinum for yourself. You can just sell stuff off to other players and make your money this way. And this is not just a theoretical option. Many players, veterans in specific, are making thousands of Platinum all the time just by farming valuable items and selling them off to other players. This is nothing reserved to endgame players only. Even at lower levels, you can already gain access to stuff that sells for a couple of Platinum, which will not make you rich, but it will be enough to buy you more inventory space for new weapons and all the type of stuff that a new player would like to have. Just by the way, if you want to know more about Platinum trading, I released a huge comprehensive guide on how to best do that just a couple of days ago. You can check it out later. But yeah, long story short, of course, if you pay a lot of money for Warframe, then you will have a faster progression, then you can technically buy yourself power by trading powerful upgrades with other players. And if you don't have a lot of time to play and you do have a busy schedule, then I think that is perfectly viable, even though a lot of players in the community will tell you that you're playing the game wrong. And on the other hand, if you have a lot of time to play but no money, then you will also be able to have fun because you can farm for pretty much everything that is important in the game. There is nothing that you could only gain from real money that is important for in-game progression. So when it comes to monetization, I can hardly imagine how you could make a free-to-play game with premium items fairer for the customer than the way that they do it. And finally, there is one more big topic that I want to talk about, and that does not necessarily have anything to do with starting the game, but more like where you're aiming to go. See, if you're somebody looking for a game that you can sink 1,000 hours or more into, then you will naturally have the question, what is it all for? How is the endgame experience? What am I grinding and farming for? So let's talk about that in the last chapter. See, the thing with Warframe is that a lot of the motivation, a lot of the stuff that you want to grind and play for, has to come from you yourself. If you want to have the nicest, most beautifully decorated orbiter, then absolutely go for it. If you want to drip out every single Warframe, give them the most bling possible, then 100% do that. In fact, there is a long-standing joke in the Warframe community that says fashion frame is endgame because after thousands of hours, the only real goal you have left is to look as stylish as possible while mowing down hordes of enemies. And as I previously mentioned, Warframe has a crazy amount of customization options to give everybody the opportunity to make their frame look as cool as can be. However, one thing that also needs to be mentioned is that unlike many other games, Warframe does not technically have this one crazy high-level endgame activity. Yes, of course, later on there are game modes that are more challenging, that have higher enemy levels, but it's not that there are specific high-level dungeons that you can only access as an endgame player and that needs highest amounts of skill to even pass. Most of the activities in Warframe are in fact pretty darn easy as long as you have the right equipment for it, with the challenge coming from the players themselves trying to survive as long as possible in a mission or to do it as quickly as they can. The game itself, though, never requires this and doesn't give you an extra reward for performing really well. That is, by the way, also one of the biggest complaints that longtime players, the people at the highest levels, have with Warframe, and that is that unlike other looter shooters, here you grind for all this power without ever really truly needing it. And where games like Destiny, for example, also offer a reasonably high amount of PvP content that keeps players longer engaged with the game, Warframe does not really do that. I mean, yes, there is a PvP game mode, it's called Conclave, but this is probably the least played game mode in the entire game, and if you're looking for an endgame PvP experience, then unfortunately, Warframe is just not the place to find that. Even if you like the way Warframe does PvP, you're probably not even going to find enough players for a lobby. But yeah, I think it's time to come to a conclusion. We've talked about a lot of very important aspects when deciding if you want to invest time into a free-to-play game or not. And just like with any other game, also with Warframe in 2025, it comes down to your personal preferences whether it is worth playing or not. If you're looking for a game to invest thousands of hours into with a lot of content where your money and your time spent is well respected by the game, if you're looking for a friendly and welcoming community and a new online place to call home, even though that sounds pretty cheesy, but it is true, then Warframe might as well be your next 10,000-hour game. I'm not even exaggerating. However, on the other hand, it should also be said that if you're somebody who likes story experiences and prefers them to be relatively comprehensive, or if you're a hardcore elitist who enjoys a very challenging, very high-end endgame experience in their games, then you might find yourself disappointed after 1,000 hours when you see that all the power you've acquired isn't even necessary and there is no single enemy that is so strong that you would ever need all of that. And I think if you're still around and you've listened to all of it, then you will now be well equipped to decide for yourself if you want to give Warframe a go, or maybe return to it after a longer hiatus, or not. As a game itself, the DNA that is there that makes up the core of the game hasn't really changed ever since, but if what you heard resonates with you, then 2025 is definitely the best point in time ever to start with Warframe. And if you have any further questions, just post them in the comments down below. I will do my best to answer as many of them as possible. And about those time-limited events, there's actually one going on right now, and it's crazy profitable. So, everything you need to know about it right here next. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Undercanio2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Morazaki, Shadow Lockhart, Antares, Patrasader, Trolloloxen, Boomia1, Mr. Games Plays, Zave, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.